Remember when a network television horror production scared an entire country so badly that CBS executives started discussing turning it into a weekly series, only for the whole idea to quietly collapse, while the man who created the vampire responsible for all of it earned under 90 seconds of actual screen time across 3 hours? The vampire is still the most frightening one ever put on American television. The series never happened, and almost nobody who watched it knew the monster's real name. Directed by Tobe Hooper, adapted by Paul Monish from Stephen King's 1975 novel, and starring David Soul, James Mason, Lance Kerwin, Bonnie Bedelia, and Reggie Nalder, Salem's Lot aired on CBS over 2 November nights in 1979 and turned an entire generation of American children into people who check their bedroom windows before sleeping. 50 years later, nothing has matched it. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about Salem's Lot. And stick around for number 1, because what CBS wanted to do after the ratings came in is something nobody talks about and everybody should. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment which got you worse, the bedroom window or the basement. Cast your vote below. Alright, don't look at your windows. Let's get into it. Most authors have complicated relationships with their most famous work. Too much attention. Too much expectation. Stephen King's most analyzed, most adapted, most debated novel isn't The Shining or it's Salem's Lot. And King has said publicly repeatedly, without qualification, that it is his personal favorite of everything he has written. Not the best-selling, not the most praised, his favorite. The reason he gives has nothing to do with vampires. It's the portrait of the town itself, the slow, Dickensian accumulation of ordinary people going about ordinary lives before something extraordinary dismantles them completely. King has described it as his attempt to ask one very specific question. What happens to a small American town if you simply remove the thing holding it together? The answer, as it turns out, is vampires. King wrote 40-plus novels. He kept coming back to this one. That tells you everything about what he thought he'd made. King wrote the first draft under the title Second Coming. He thought it worked. His wife Tabitha told him, with the directness that has apparently characterized their entire marriage, that it sounded like a bad sex novel. King changed it. The replacement was Jerusalem's Lot, the full name of the fictional Maine town where the story takes place. The publisher's response was that it sounded too religious, too pointed, too on the nose for a mainstream horror release, so they shortened it, dropped the Jerusa, kept the lem, and put an apostrophe at the front to acknowledge the amputation. Most readers never notice that apostrophe. Fewer still know what it represents. The title that became one of the most recognized in horror fiction is a compromise solution arrived at by committee after the author's wife vetoed the original for sounding like basement smut. The apostrophe is a scar. It marks where the real name used to be. Before Tobe Hooper, before the CBS deal, before any of the casting decisions that made the 1979 miniseries what it is, Salem Lot belonged to George Romero. Warner Brothers had acquired the rights and approached Romero to direct a theatrical feature. This was 1977. Romero had just finished Martin, his own deeply personal, stripped-down vampire film, and was about to make Dawn of the Dead. He was by any measure the most interesting filmmaker alive for this particular material. He said no. Not because he didn't like the book. Not because of scheduling. He walked because the project had been moved from theatrical release to network television, and he didn't believe you could make Salem's Lot with those restrictions intact. He was probably right. The novel is brutal. It is bloody. CBS would have shredded it on sight. Romero's position was simple. He would rather not make the film than make a compromised version of it. Tobe Hooper had no such reservations and made something that terrified people anyway. The director who said it couldn't be done was right. The director who ignored him was also right. Producer Richard Kobritz made the decision that turned Salem's Lot from a competent TV movie into something genuinely unsettling. He watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. That was his audition process. He watched Hooper's film, decided the man understood how to manufacture dread from almost nothing, and offered him the job. What Kobritz did not factor in or factored in and ignored was that Hooper had never worked in television in his life, not once. Actor Lance Kerwin, who played Mark Petrie, later recalled that the crew operated at a feature film pace rather than a TV production pace, slower, more deliberate, more attentive to atmosphere than any network schedule could comfortably accommodate. The result was a miniseries that doesn't move like television. It breathes differently. It takes its time in ways that 1979 CBBS programming never took its time. Kobritz hired a feature filmmaker and let him make a feature. CBS got something it hadn't commissioned and couldn't quite classify. They aired it anyway. The Marston House, the decayed, looming, hilltop mansion that watches over the town like a bad conscience, does not exist in Ferndale, California, where the bulk of the miniseries was filmed. The production needed a house on a hill that overlooked the town, exactly as Stephen King described it, No such house existed. What did exist was a smaller property on a hilltop, owned by a family who were perfectly happy living there until a film crew arrived and made them an offer, $20,000 to temporarily relocate. In exchange, the family would receive all the timber used in construction when filming wrapped. Then the production spent $100,000 in 1979 money, building a three-story facade over the top of the existing structure, a false front, a theatrical illusion. In 1979, that same $100,000 could have purchased an entire house, including the interiors. Instead, it bought the outside of one. The family got their timber. The production got their haunted house. The Marston House that scared a generation of American children is a shell, a mask bolted to someone else's home. Alicia Cook Jr. and Marie Windsor were cast in Salem's Lot as Weasel Phillips and Eva Miller, a couple with a complicated history, living in the same boarding house, orbiting each other with the wary familiarity of people who have been around each other too long. Producer Richard Kubrick put them together deliberately and privately. In 1956, Cook and Windsor had played a couple in Stanley Kubrick's The Killing, 23 years earlier. Kubrick was a Kubrick devotee. He reunited them as an inside joke, not a wink to the audience, not a reference the average viewer could catch. A private tribute buried in the casting designed to amuse exactly one person, himself. Nobody watching the miniseries on CBS in November 1979 would have had any idea. The two actors played their scenes. The reference existed entirely in Kubrick's head. Some jokes are worth making even when you're the only one who gets them. Across the full 3-hour running time of Salem's Lot, Kurt Barlow, the ancient master vampire, responsible for the systematic destruction of an entire town, appears on screen for less than 90 seconds. Not 90 minutes, 90 seconds. The creature that made people afraid of their bedroom windows, that became one of the most recognizable horror images in American television history, is barely present in the film at all. Reggie Nalder, who played Barlow, was asked about the experience. His response, delivered with the economy of a man who had been in the business for 30 years, was this: the makeup and contact lenses were painful, but he got used to them. What he liked best of all was the money. The most feared face on American television in 1979 belonged to a man who described his primary satisfaction as the paycheck. 90 seconds. One of horror's most indelible monsters. He was in the room for less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee. In King's novel, Kurt Barlow speaks. He speaks at length, eloquently and terrifyingly, in complete paragraphs, like a man who has had centuries to perfect the art of intimidation through language. He is charming, cultured, and frightening in the way that an extremely intelligent predator is frightening. Producer Kubrick looked at that version of the character and made a unilateral decision. Barlow would not speak a single word. He would be transformed from a sophisticated European villain into a silent, monstrous creature, Nosferatu rather than Dracula. Kubrick explained it simply. He felt that giving a vampire a voice in 1979 was suicidal. You couldn't do Bela Lugosi without getting a laugh. You couldn't do something new without risking something worse. Silence was the only safe option. King objected. He had written the character one way and watched it become something else entirely. Then the footage came back. He saw Nalder's face, the makeup, the total absence of language, and he changed his mind completely. The silent Barlow, King later admitted, put the focus back on the human characters, exactly where it needed to be. The thing King hated before filming became the thing he praised after it. If that bedroom window scene still makes you check yours before sleeping, and you know who you are, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment. Which version of Barlow is scarier, the silent monster or the speaking villain from the novel? Settle it below. Alright, back to Jerusalem's Lot. Reggie Nalder was not Reggie Nalder. He was Alfred Reginald Natzler, born in Vienna in 1907, the son of an actor and operetta singer. He performed in second-rate Viennese theaters as a young man, then moved to Paris in the 1930s, where he worked as an Apache dancer in cabarets, a physically demanding, acrobatic performance style that was popular in Parisian nightlife at the time. When Nazi Germany absorbed Austria in 1938, he did not go back. After the war, he worked for the BBC's German language service. He came to Hollywood later, speaking 4 languages, carrying a past nobody in the industry fully understood. His face, partially disfigured by burns, the exact circumstances of which were never clearly documented and remain disputed, made him unforgettable on screen. Alfred Hitchcock put that face in The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1956. Frank Sinatra personally requested him for The Manchurian Candidate, 1962, in a brief uncredited role as a communist spymaster. He was known in the industry as the face that launched 1,000 trips. He died of bone cancer in Santa Monica in 1991. The truth behind his scars went with him. When producer Kubrick put together his wish list for the villainous duo of Straker and Barlow, James Mason was at the top. Kubrick sent him the script. Mason loved it and signed on. Then Kubrick cast Mason's wife Clarissa K. Mason as Marjorie Glick, a supporting character who is turned into a vampire by her own son and subsequently staked, burned with a cross, and disintegrated on screen. James Mason spent days on set watching his real-life wife be killed by the production. Multiple takes, multiple angles. Clarissa K. Mason was credited in the film simply as Clarissa K. She died in 1994. Mason himself died in 1984, the same year as the composer Harry Sukman. Two of the production's central figures gone in the same calendar year. Mason had described the role of Straker as one he took out of what some sources characterized as semi-retirement, a man who didn't need the work, but wanted this particular role. He watched his wife be destroyed on camera for it. The sequence that defined the miniseries, a pale child in pajamas floating outside a darkened window, fingers scratching at the glass, breath fogging the cold air, was not achieved with wire rigging. Tobe Hooper made the decision early to use a boom crane instead, partly because wires were expensive, and partly because he felt even the best wire work left traces visible on film. The actors were positioned on the crane arm and moved slowly through their floating movements. For the reverse shots, Hooper went further. The footage was filmed in reverse. The child was pulled away from the window and the film was reversed in editing, giving the floating an eerie quality that no forward direction movement could replicate. Hooper later admitted that when it came time to film a child actually flying through a window, entering rather than floating outside, he realized wires couldn't have accomplished it regardless. The crane was the only solution. What looked like a supernatural effect was a cost-cutting measure that happened to be better than the expensive alternative. The Lost Boys homaged this exact shot 8 years later. It is one of the most imitated images in American horror cinema. It was an accident of budget. When Salem's Lot was sold internationally, it was sold as a theatrical feature. The 3-hour miniseries was cut to approximately 110 minutes for European cinema release, removing roughly 81 minutes of footage, which is longer than many feature films. The plot in this version becomes compressed to near incoherence. Characters appear and disappear without context. Story beats that required the miniseries' slow accumulation to function are stripped to their barest mechanics. The theatrical cut did include alternate, more violent takes of several scenes that were too graphic for CBS broadcast, different angles, different moments more explicit than the American audience ever saw. Beyond the TV version and the theatrical cut, 2 additional edits exist. A version that removes the credit sequences to allow uninterrupted viewing, and a version that restores specific footage cut from the standard release. One scene, Larry Crockett placing a gun barrel in his own mouth, was filmed for the theatrical version and subsequently removed from most DVD releases, appearing only on certain VHS copies. 4 versions, 1 story. The one you probably saw is the least violent of all of them. Harry Sukman was born on December 2nd, 1912. He died on December 2nd, 1984, 72 years old, his own birthday. The score for Salem's Lot, composed and conducted at the Burbank Studios in the autumn of 1979, recorded across 4 sessions between October and January, was the last significant work of his career. Producer Kubrick had asked specifically for something in the mold of Bernard Herrmann, old-fashioned, atmospheric, built for dread rather than spectacle. Sukman had won an Academy Award. He had composed for Victor Young's productions, scored The Virginian and Dr. Kildare for television, and spent 5 decades creating music for other people's images. Salem's Lot was where he finished. The soundtrack was not officially released on vinyl until 2016, 32 years after Sukman's death, 37 years after the miniseries aired. He never heard his score on a record. He finished his last job and died on his birthday. That is either poetic or devastating, and there's no version where it's neither. This is the central technical paradox of Salem's Lot and the fact that makes it genuinely remarkable as an object. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hooper's previous film, the one that got him the job, is relentless and visceral and soaked in threat. CBS in 1979 would not permit what Texas Chainsaw had permitted. No gore, no explicit violence. A standards department that reviewed footage and cut anything that crossed its threshold. Hooper made the scariest thing on American television that year inside those restrictions. He did it through atmosphere, light, sound, and one actor's face seen for under 90 seconds. Lance Kerwin noted that the whole production operated at a feature pace, unhurried, deliberate, spending time on the texture of the town and the faces of its people before taking those things away. The horror in Salem's Lot is the horror of subtraction. Things disappear. People are absent. Windows are looked at. Hooper had spent his career making films that assaulted the viewer. He spent 7 weeks in 1979 making something that simply watched them, and that turned out to be worse. Salem's Lot aired on November 17th and November 24th, 1979. The ratings were exceptional, among the strongest CBS had seen for a dramatic event that year, and the network's response, according to production documentation from the time, was to seriously discuss converting Salem's Lot into an ongoing weekly series, a regular television program. Jerusalem's Lot as a setting for Vampire of the Week storytelling, presumably with David Soul anchoring and the town slowly repopulating between episodes. The idea was floated with genuine intent. Conversations happened, then the conversation stopped. The series never materialized. Nobody has given a clean public explanation for why. What exists instead is the miniseries itself, complete, finite, bounded, which has aged into something that no ongoing series could have preserved. Weekly production would have required compromise, speed, repetition, and the gradual flattening of everything that made the original strange. The best thing that happened to Salem's Lot was the series that never got made. So there you have it. 15 weird facts about a miniseries that was almost directed by Romero, starred a Nazi-fleeing Viennese cabaret dancer for under 90 seconds, was scored by a man who died on his own birthday, built a fake house on top of a real one, filmed its most iconic sequence backward to save money, and terrified 50 million Americans without spilling a single drop of blood. Stephen King calls it his favorite thing he ever wrote. After everything you've just heard, it's hard to disagree with him. Like and subscribe if you want more of this. And share this with whoever made you watch Salem's Lot for the first time, the person who knew exactly what that bedroom window scene would do to you and let you watch it anyway. They owe you an apology. They also did you a favor. Until next time, check your windows.